Thank you for tuning in to another episode of WDIK, the podcast for the rest of us. I'm your bearded host, Orchestra. As you know, we always welcome your input on the show. We are here for your questions, comments, concern, or suggestion. Please feel free to email us at WDIK at OKESTRASHOW.com or what do I know at orchestrashow.com. Today, I want you to imagine a a world where your voice is silent and your future is determined by others. That, my friend, is the reality for millions around the globe who lacks the fundamental right to vote. Voting is more than just a civic duty. I like to say voting is a powerful tool for shaping our community. It's a tool that allows us to hold our leaders accountable and driving positive change. In a few days, a major election will take place in the United States. Some say this is the most consequential election of our time. I think every election is the most consequential election of our time because no matter how micro or macro it is, a change is happening with every single election. Today, you might have guessed by now, we are talking about the power of the ballot, why you should vote, and why every vote counts. Come on the journey with me. The concept of democracy originated in Athens around 508 to 507 BC. Over the centuries, the idea of voting has evolved significantly from the Athenian democracy to the universal suffrage movement of the 19th and the 20th century. Voting is a cornerstone of a modern democracy, ensuring that our government reflect the will of the people it serves. A study by the Pew Research Center found that voter turnout has a significant impact on policy outcomes. The more people that vote, their elected officials are more likely to represent their interests. Voting is a fundamental part of our social contract. It's an unwritten agreement between citizens and their government. By participating in an election, we all collectively we are agreeing to abide by the rules and laws of our society. As I previously stated, our story begins in ancient Greece, which is the birthplace of democracy. Back in the 5th century BCE in Athens, the concept of democratia, or what you might call rule by the people, was born. However, however, it's important to note that clearly this form of democracy at the time was only limited, and I mean limited to free male citizens of Athens. It excludes slaves, exclude women, exclude foreigners, right? So only the male citizen, free male citizen, had the right to vote and to participate in the decision making. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. Let's fast forward to the Middle Age in Europe. We see a different story there. Feudal society were governed by monarchies, with voting right often restricted again to landowner males, right? You have to own properties. You have to hold lands. Those are the only ones that get to vote. The common folk had little to no say in the governance of their lands. A stark contrast to the earlier democratic idea of ancient Greece. 18th century brought us the Age of Enlightenment, a period that was ripe with revolutionary ideas about individual rights and governance. In 1776, the United States Declaration of Independence proclaimed that government derived their power from the consent of the governed. And you know what I'm going to say next, right? The lovely three words: we, the people. Yet, the US Constitution of 1787 left the matter of voting rights to individual states, leading to a patchwork of regulations and limitations, depending on which state you find yourself. Leaving a universal matter of importance to the state is often asking for exponential of problems. Something that important should have decided once and for all at the federal level. Now, as we move into the 19th century, the fight for more inclusive voting rights began to change and gain traction, right? By 1820s, many US states had eliminated property qualification for voting, allowing more white men, regardless of land ownership, to vote. But the most significant change came in 1865 with the 15th Amendment of the Constitution, which theoretically granted black men the right to vote. However, you know, discriminatory practices like Jim Crow laws and other local laws prevented many from exercising this right for decades. Now, one of the monumental shifts occurred in 1920s with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. After a long and arduous struggle, women in the United States finally secured the right to vote. This victory was just not the triumph for gender equality, but a significant step towards a more inclusive democracy. By the mid 20th century, we saw another pivotal movement in the expansion of voting rights, which was the civil rights movement, marked by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and organizations such as the NAACP. They fought tirelessly against racial discrimination. Their efforts culminated in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which to eliminate the barrier to voting for Black Americans. Right, some of those barriers include literacy tests and poll taxes. Now, moving a little bit forward, few years, 1971, the 26th Amendment was ratified. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. This change recognized significant contributions and the sacrifice of younger Americans, particularly the Vietnam War, and it expanded the electorate to include more of the nation's youth. I mean, can you imagine people who are old enough to fight for their country? They are old enough to die for their country, but not old enough to vote. right? In recent decade, voting rights have continued to evolve and face new challenges. In 2013, the Supreme Court, in the case Shelby County versus Obama's Eric Holder, right? That decision struck down key provisions of the voting rights, right? Many states are no longer required to do some things that would have prevented them from oppressing their voters, right? This led to resurgence of states' laws on voter ID requirements and other regulations. The 2020 election also led to the ongoing debate and legal battle over voting rights, including issues, right? Including issues related to mail-in voting and election security. Here in Georgia, an overwhelming Republican-controlled election board introduced rules that were, in my opinion, geared to favor their candidate overwhelmingly. But thank goodness, just last week, a couple of judges, I think it was one judge, I think it was a judge, ruled all of those rules unconstitutional and prevented them from being enacted. And there you have it. We just went through a journey through the rich and complex history of voting rights, from the ancient Greece to the modern United States. The fight for the right to vote has been long and often arduous, right? But each step forward has brought us closer to a more inclusive and representative democracy. Voting is a key component of the checks and balances system. Voting is ensuring that no single branch of the government has too much power. When we all vote, we are sending a message to our elected official that they are accountable to the people. Our history is filled with many examples of elections that have led to significant changes in government. I'll give you a good example. The 1964 presidential election saw the defeat of Barry Goldwater. Barry was a candidate who opposed the civil rights legislation. Another good example, 2018. In 2018, we saw a record number of women were elected to Congress, demonstrating the power of voting to diversify our political landscape. This election was a turning point for women representation in government. I believe this week marks the 100th anniversary of the first elected female governor in the United States. Voting has been instrumental in driving social change, from the abolition of slavery to the advancement of women's rights. For a good example, right, as previously stated, the 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, granted women the right to vote, making a significant milestone in the fight for equality. When we vote, we are not just acting as individual. We are part of a collective force that can bring about significant change. Just as Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, I quote, um, "Our life begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." Right? Another great example of the impact of voting on social change was the 2018 midterm election, where we saw a surge in voter turnout among young people, which led to the election of several progressive candidates. This demonstrated the power of young voters to shape the future of our country. If you're still sitting there wondering, should you vote? I'm going to tell you right away. Yes, you should vote because every vote, every single vote contributes to the outcome. If you don't believe me, well, go ask Al Gore and George Bush. That's W. The outcome of the 2000 presidential election was a perfect example. So, might be this upcoming election as well. It's going to be very close, according to the poll numbers we've been hearing. Um, the difference, in some states, when this is over next week, might come down to a few thousand votes, right? It will be a disservice if I don't touch on and maybe expatiate on some voting barriers that we have today. Unfortunately, there are many barriers to voting in America, including suppression tactics that uh, disproportionately affect the marginalized communities. These tactics can include gerrymandering, it can include restrictive voter ID laws, and access to limited polling places, right? One of the most common form of voter suppression is the implementation of strict voter ID laws. This law proponent, they argue, right? The people that are pushing this law, they argue that this law prevents voter fraud. But the critics point out that they disproportionately impact minorities, the elderly, and low income individuals who may not have the required identifications. For example, to get a government issue ID can be challenging for some, especially if they don't have access to transportation or the necessary documentations that is required to get the ID in the first place, right? States periodically clean up their voter roll to remove, some of the outdated or incorrect registration. By all means, that makes sense. However, these purges can sometimes be overly aggressive and ends up removing eligible voter from the rolls without their knowledge until they get to the polling booth. Then they will find out. This can lead to confusion when voters find out that they are no longer registered at the poll. Despite despite federal law preventing such action to be performed too close to the election, several states, even in recent months, a month or two ago, states have removed voters from their role. As my Yoruba people often say, there is no way you can gather heads that you won't gather both wet and dry. Meaning, mistakes will happen, and when you purging the record, there's a very high chance that you would definitely purge some valid voter. They will be swept up into this type of last minute or late purges. If I walk into a polling booth knowing fully well that I'm a registered voter and I'm told by the poll worker that I'm not registered, I don't think I'm going to waste my time trying to fight them and argue with them. I'm most likely just going to turn around and leave, right? And that definitely decreases the chance that I will do anything about it or that I will vote in the next election, right? Another barrier is closing polling places, most especially in minority or low income neighborhoods. This tactic can result in long lines and extended wait times, discouraging people from casting their ballots. In some cases, voters may have to travel long distance to reach their nearest polling places, which can be particularly burdensome for some if they don't have a reliable transportation. In my opinion, the worst, I think the worst barrier to voting is gerrymandering. This involves drawing electoral district boundaries to favor one party over another. This is basically manipulating district lines. Politicians can dilute the voting power of a certain group by effectively minimizing their influence in elections. This practice undermines the principle of fair representation and can entrench political power. Some of the shapes of gerrymandered districts will scare the daylight out of you. You see them. It's as if some of these politicians they don't even care. They don't even care how obvious the cheating appears these days. The the disjointed districts, the I mean they go all out when they gerrymandering a district, right? Now, another barrier that I think of is when we limit the days and hours for early voting. Since probably since 2008 or 2010, I have voted early in every single election, except for maybe one or two runoff that I voted on the election day. Limiting the days and hours for early voting, or should I say, imposing strict rules on mailing ballots, can make it harder, extremely harder, for people to vote, particularly those with inflexible schedule or those who lives in rural area, right? These restrictions can disproportionately affect the working class voters. It can affect students. It can also affect the elderly, those who may rely on the convenience of the early or mail-in voting to participate in elections. It's it's as if each time a politician notice that an idea favors the opposite candidate more than them, no matter how positive, how good, how superb the idea is for the community, the next thing you are going to see is those that idea will get asked. I remember the days of early voting that included Sundays. I know of churches that organize their people after a Sunday service, drive them down to the poll, and go vote on a Sunday. Gone are those days. Um, some politicians are even fighting to prevent the idea the idea of making election day a public holiday, or they are even fighting the idea of making, of giving, should I say, paid time off, right? The idea of paid time off on election day to make it easier for people to vote. You wonder why? Why? Right? What are they gaining from that? Because they want to keep the opposite side from getting the necessary votes. Some states, even some states, have implemented laws that makes it harder to register to vote. They sometimes require proof of citizenships or by limiting voter registration drives. All this restriction is doing is to disproportionately affect young voter. It's disproportionately affect minorities and low income individuals. Those are the ones that are being affected. Many states even have laws that disfranchise individual with felony convictions, even after they've served their sentences. This practice also disproportionately affect African American and Latino communities. It's further marginalizing this group and limiting their political power. Even when some states restore the right, even when they restore the right to vote, they still put in places languages and barriers that put fear in the hearts of people attempting to resume their voting right. They've served their time. They've been punished. Why are we not giving them back their right to vote? In this age of social media and AI technology, spreading false information about voting procedure or intimidating voter at the poll can also be a barrier. It can suppress voter turnout. This can include something as misleading robocalls that tells you, because you are a Republican, you are only allowed to vote a day after the election. Imagine that. Yeah, robocalls are out there sometimes, saying stuff like that. We could have fake news or um, even physical presence at polling places to intimidate voters. Make me understand, why does a voter need to openly carry a gun into a polling place or polling booth? Why? And I'm not talking about a concealed weapon, you know, I'm not talking about concealed weapons here. These tactics create confusion and fear, discouraging people from exercising their right to vote. Suppression remains a significant challenge to our democracy. By understanding these tactics, we can better advocate for a fair and accessible voting for all. Fortunately, there are ongoing efforts to improve voter access and combat voter suppression in several states. A good example was the judge here in Georgia striking down those last minute election changes that the election board were trying to put in place, right? This effort needs to include automatic voter registration. Maybe when you renew your driver license, you're automatically registered as long as they know exactly you're a citizen or not, right? Maybe extending early voting. We talked about the possibility of making election day a public holiday for people to have the time to vote. Or make it a paid time off that employers will grant their employees to get out there and vote. And we could also improve mail-in voting. Voter education is essential for empowering citizens to make informed choices. I believe it was the National Civic League. They did a study. The study found that voter education can significantly increase voter turnout and the knowledge of political issues. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the worst nightmare or the best thing that can happen to a politician? No, take a wild guess. Go ahead. In this day and age, I think the worst nightmare or the best thing that can happen to a politician is not their opponent, it's an informed voter. An informed voter is paramount, it's crucial to the health of our democracy. It's essential to evaluate candidates beyond their party affiliation, focusing on their qualification, their policies, and their track record to select those that are best equipped to tackle the challenges that we face. And informed voters hold elected officials accountable, which is vital for a healthy democracy. Just imagine if you can vote online. If we combine blockchain and online voting, we could um, we could revolutionize election by improving security, trust, and i- improving accessibility. Right? When this technology are merged together, they can offer us promises. Their successful implementation require building the public's confidence and ensuring that all voters can access the system. I'm sure that there are states or municipalities, or should I say maybe businesses that are exploring this option and they are testing the use of blockchain. This will foster an inclusive and resilient democratic process. By embracing these innovations, we can create a more accessible, a more secure, and transparent voting process. Voting is it's a personal responsibility. A single vote can make a difference, even in close election. You casting a vote can inspire others to participate and create a more engaged and informed electorate. I can't emphasize enough the importance of passing on the tradition of voting to future generations. Voting is a fundamental right that allows us to shape our communities. It allows us to hold our leaders accountable. It allows us to drive positive changes. It's a powerful tool for creating a more just and equitable society. So, today, I encourage you to register to vote. It might be too late to vote for this upcoming election, but I encourage you, if you have not registered to vote, register. participate in elections, and stay informed about current events. Your vote matters, can make a difference. Susan B. Anthony once said, the ballot is the mightiest weapon in the arsenal of democracy. By exercising your right to vote, we can create a better future for ourselves and generation to come. As I wrap this episode, you might ask me, what do you know? Don't mind me. I'm just a curious soul exploring the intricate dance of democracy. But every question you ask, every fact you uncover, and every vote you cast makes a difference. So I implore you, let's stay informed, stay engaged, and keep this democracy thriving. Okay? If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review and subscribe to What Do I Know? Please feel free to share it with your friend, family, and anyone interested in the power of the ballot. We would also love to hear your thoughts, questions. We'd love to hear your comments. So feel free to send them to what do I know at okestrashw.com or wdik at orchestrashow.com. As always, I am your humble host, Orchestra. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, your voice matters.